According to Health and Social Care Information Report, Yorkshire and the Humber has one of the lowest referral rates of vulnerable adults in the UK, with 200 per 100,000 of population. According to a North Lincolnshire Safeguarding Adults report, physical abuse and neglect accounts for over 70% of abuse cases, with financial and emotional abuse accounting for approximately another 25%.
Sue, first of all, what do we mean by adult abuse?
They include the more obvious abuse, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, and sometimes psychological abuse that causes emotional harm to people. And with adults, of course, there are other forms of abuse, particularly financial abuse. Vulnerable people can be abused by people who take advantage of them and exploit them.
How much of a problem is it?
The truth is, we don't really know how big the problem is. What we do know is that the vulnerable groups are getting larger. So, for instance, our elderly population is much larger, and the more people that are dependent for their care from other people, the more vulnerable they become.
So how do you spot the signs of potential abuse?
Physical abuse, there may be obvious signs, like a person may suffer bruises, they may have physical injuries. But one of the more subtle signs might be about looking for signs of neglect. So they could be looking more dirty than you would expect. They may look ill and may not be appearing to get treatment. The other bit about financial abuse is when people are short of money that you would normally expect someone to have to buy the things that are needed for daily living.
Let's talk about the perpetrators. I mean, who are the main offenders of this?
There's no particular category of offenders. So it could be a carer, it could be a family member, it could be a son or a daughter that's caring for an elderly parent, but it could be from anywhere. And sometimes abuse can occur from people who befriend vulnerable people.
I suppose it's difficult to comprehend for many people why the victims don't report this.
But for instance, if an elderly person was being looked after by a neighbour and was getting a lot of help from a neighbour and was very, very isolated, and they knew that that neighbour was probably using extra money from their bank account, they may be more than happy for that person to continue helping them purely because they don't have anybody else. And sometimes a person may be abused by the person whose home they're living in, so they could be at risk of losing their home, and they may not want that person to get into trouble. The other thing is they may worry that it isn't that important and they don't want to trouble people.
It's a terribly sad state of affairs, isn't it? And Tom, I know that you've reported a case of abuse of an elderly gentleman, I think. Tell me that story.
Yes, in my role as victims champion, I had a referral. I said, look, I'm here, I'm the victims champion. I understand that you've been subject to abuse, antisocial behaviour. And he was rather perplexed that I was there. Who sent you? Why are you here? He told me there was noise nuisance from both neighbours. But the more I spoke to him, I had a feeling that there was more to the case than he was actually telling me, and so I decided that I would refer it into Safeguarding Adults.
It's a terrible story, that, Sue, but presumably doesn't come as any surprise to you.
No, quite often those people may be frightened about seeking help because they suffer repercussions sometimes, but people will help you and people will respond. And people will make sure that as far as possible the response is kept as confidential as possible.
What was the resolution to this story?
The outcome was excellent, and of course I reported it back to the partnership, who was delighted.
Thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to me about it.